just inviting Harriet in.
Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
How are you
doing?
Oh, you know, same as everyone, I think. How are you doing?
Yeah, fine. It's just a very strange time at the moment, as I'm sure lots of people are feeling.
Yeah. Were you able to pop out?
Yeah, so I live near my grandmother, and she's obviously self-isolating. So it's been a real struggle to get enough.
Sorry, my bananas, I keep doing that. Yeah.
As everyone will be experiencing. Hi, Abby.
Hi, Abby.
It's difficult to kind of keep her topped up with food. So I've just been going to the shops every day and trying to get her bits and bobs and dropping it by.
That's good.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be recording this and putting it on YouTube, and I'll be captioning it. So I think maybe we start and not just wait to see, like, if people join us now, because I'll have it all later. So hello to everyone who's joined. Today I'm joined by Harriet Smith. I also have Sebastian working out next to me there. He is waving. So if you hear any weird noises, that's him. But Harriet, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your professional background, please?
Sure. So I'm a registered dietitian and also a nutritionist. So for people who are perhaps unaware of the difference between dietitian and nutritionist, dietitians are healthcare professionals, and we are trained and qualified to be able to work with people with a range of medical conditions. We also work with people without medical conditions, but the nutrition advice that we give is tailored to their needs. And dietitians can work in a range of settings, lots of them at the moment, obviously with coronavirus situation. A lot of them are working really, really hard in the NHS to deliver really important frontline nutrition support services. So a massive sort of thank you to everyone, my friends and my colleagues who are doing that at the moment. It's a really difficult time, as you can imagine. I think lots of them are very, very overworked. I have ehlers-danlos syndrome myself, similar to yourself, Natasha. So for me, working in the NHS wasn't an option. So I work freelance. I run my own business, HRS Communications, which is a nutrition communications business. So we work with food, nutrition, medical nutrition companies to help with their communication strategy. Up until recently, I also did one-to-one private consultations, and I have a special interest in working with people with other chronic health conditions. Because of my first-hand experience, I know that it can be difficult, even with all the knowledge from a nutrition and dietetic degree. At times it can be really difficult to eat well when you're not feeling well.
And so I think the reason that we wanted to speak today is because a lot of people who live with chronic illness anyway struggle with finding the energy to eat consistently, or just finding ways that work for them to eat. And so with the additional challenges of isolation or perhaps lack of access to food, there's kind of now an additional challenge on top of that. So I think perhaps we could talk about that first, and then maybe a little bit of coronavirus diet myth debunking at the end, maybe, because I'm sure you have some things to say about that. And I know that this community is particularly often targeted with online pseudoscience diet information, and so kind of ways to stay safe online could be quite good, I think, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. So fire away whatever questions you have.
So if we kind of take it out of the current situation, from your experience, what have been some of the biggest issues that people living with chronic illness face just on a day-to-day basis with trying to deal with food, whether that be fatigue, and we can talk in more detail about that later, whether that's fatigue or finding ways to stick to specific diet plans?
Yeah, I think often when people have a health condition, especially a long-term chronic illness, it's really difficult trying to find the balance of sort of optimizing your health and well-being and eating well, but also not falling victim to a lot of this sort of nutrition misinformation that's out there, especially on social media. And lots of well-meaning family and friends and colleagues are often quick to jump in with their own diet and nutrition advice. But the problem is with anecdotal evidence, if we can even call it evidence, is that what works for one person won't necessarily work for another person. And, you know, like I said, I've got a degree in nutrition and dietetics, and I know about the importance of making sure that nutrition advice is underpinned by good quality scientific evidence. But even for myself, sometimes when you are feeling so unwell and you're so desperate to do things that might make you feel better, it's very, very easy to think, oh, maybe I will try that specific dietary approach, maybe I'll try that supplement. And this isn't about telling people what will and won't work for them, because you know, something might make you feel better, and whether that's due to the product or the diet itself or the placebo effect, which we know can have a strong effect on how people feel as well, it's difficult to determine. But ultimately, I like to try and help my clients and people with chronic illnesses to ensure that any advice they're following is based on evidence, and that's sort of what underpins nutrition and dietetics.
And what are some ways for people, if they're coming across a lot of information online, especially there's so much now, eat this to protect your throat, or, you know, drink these things and you won't get corona. What are some ways for people to use some skills to, or that can learn some skills to be able to see something online and say, maybe I need to question this a little bit more?
Yeah, I think if something sounds too good to be true, ask for evidence. So ask the person putting that message out there, what evidence do you have to back up what you're saying? And if it's a healthcare professional, especially a dietitian or nutritionist, they should be able to justify what they're saying with good science. And they'll be more than happy to point you in the direction of, you know, scientific paper or some evidence-based article backing up what they're saying. Another thing I would recommend is look at who's giving that nutrition advice, okay? Are they an Instagram influencer? Are they a health professional? Okay, even in the field of nutrition, there's a big difference in terms of the background that someone has and the learning that they have around nutrition. So I mentioned earlier, if you're a registered nutritionist, a registered dietitian, you will be trained to degree level, and therefore they are trained to make sure that the nutrition advice they're giving is based on good evidence. There are some unqualified nutritionists out there, and you know, some of them will be evidence-based, but some of them won't be. So make sure that you are taking advice from someone who is trained in their area, ideally a registered nutritionist, registered dietitian. But I think another thing to make clear is it's important that health professionals work within their remit. So you will find doctors, you will find nurses, physios, trying to give advice. Sometimes it's perhaps not within their area of practice. And, you know, sometimes that can be harmful if, for example, a doctor's not got any training in nutrition. Now, of course, some of these professionals will have done additional degrees, additional training, and therefore be qualified to give nutrition advice, but some of them might not be. And I've certainly seen this recently around the coronavirus situation that we're in, with well-meaning doctors and other health professionals giving out some, unfortunately, non-evidence-based nutrition advice. And that's when we get misinformation, the public get confused, and we get mixed messages floating around.
And there are a lot of major broadcasters as well doing a lot of kind of countering of the major misinformation stuff that's going around, right? So you're seeing the here are the biggest things that are floating around Facebook at the moment. Here's why that's nonsense, or here's why this doesn't work. And one of the simple tricks that I always used to use, because of a lot of people don't just have access to a dietitian or a nutritionist to be like, I randomly would text you sometimes, but most people don't have access to that. But you know, I often just search the thing with debunked misinformation or pseudoscience next to it, and often people have written why that thing isn't right.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, sometimes when we haven't got a lot of time, particularly at the moment, to go into depth and analyse every headline that we're reading, there are some really good Instagram accounts run by dietitians, nutritionists and doctors, where they are debunking some of these myths that are floating around. And that can be particularly useful. But I would just say, especially at a time when we're probably all spending more time on social media, just question who that person is giving the advice and whether they're qualified to be giving that advice.
Yeah, and perhaps we can make a little list of people that are sharing good evidence at the moment, and I can put it in the description box of the video when I upload it, of some kind of good,
sure.
thank you. So kind of let's leave Corona to the side for now. I think the majority of the questions that I got were very much based around managing eating well, whatever that means to individuals, when they have fatigue or they just don't have the energy to be able to prepare food. And now that's definitely been exacerbated when people don't necessarily have access to the care that they had been relying on. So if you could maybe talk about some energy saving ways for people with chronic illness to manage food preparation, that would be great.
Sure. So I think we have to slightly adapt some of the advice I'm giving now in light of the corona situation, because normally I would say to people, make sure you've got some store cupboard essentials in, and that might be more challenging depending on where you're located geographically in the country at the moment, especially in London. But I would, where possible, I'd encourage people, you don't need to panic buy at the moment. We know from the government there's plenty of food to go around for everybody. And you know, if you're buying lots of food, then it can mean that other people don't necessarily access that food. However, having some long-lasting food in your cupboard, such as your starchy carbohydrate food, so pasta, rice, bread, potatoes, are really good ways of having a base for your meals which provides energy. Those foods last a long time. They don't go off for, you know, weeks or months, so it's great things to have in your cupboard. Frozen foods, I have a lot of frozen vegetables, Mediterranean vegetables, frozen potato wedges, sweet potato chunks, fish cakes, bean burgers. I think a lot of people worry that frozen food and tinned food, for example, is not as nutritious as fresh food. But actually, you might be surprised to learn that with fresh vegetables and fruit, for example, because they're often frozen right after the point of picking, it conserves the nutrients better than fresh food that's been sat in the supermarket for several months, or several weeks rather. So don't be afraid to use frozen foods or tinned food. Even fruit juice, we talk a lot about, you know, fruit juice being sugary, but a portion of fruit juice, a small glass of about 150 mils a day, that's a way to get one of your 5 a day. And then think about how you can start to use these foods to put together a relatively balanced meal. So when you think about balance, you want to think about your carbohydrate foods for energy. So you might think about a piece of toast, a jacket potato, rice or pasta for your carbohydrate. And then you want to think about adding some protein, which is good for strong tissues. So that might be chicken, tofu, fish, eggs, pulses. Then you want to be thinking about some healthy fats. That might be olive oil, nuts, avocado, okay? And then you want to be thinking about your fruits and veg. And like I said earlier, that can be fresh, juiced, tinned, frozen. There's lots of different options available. Sorry, go on.
No.
I was going to say, it doesn't matter if you don't put together a perfectly balanced meal when you're feeling tired. That might be that, you know, I have bad days when all I eat is toast and cereal, okay? But I know that generally things will balance out over time. And that's an important thing to remember with a chronic illness. You don't have to be perfect, okay? Over time, I'm sure you will be getting enough balance of those different food groups.
I think that's a really good point, because I think I've definitely gone through phases when I haven't had anyone to help me and I've been completely responsible for what I eat for a long period of time. And then when I can't eat kind of quote unquote healthily, I've been beating myself up about that. But yeah, that's a really important thing, I think, for everyone to remember, especially right now. So we know that we shouldn't beat ourselves up if we're not completely full of energy to be able to prepare the food every day. What are some tips beyond having frozen food for preparation specifically? What are some good chronic illness friendly food prep methods, or things that people could keep in mind for making sure that they can keep fed throughout the day?
Yeah, I think I mean, I don't like the phrase bulk cooking, because I think that really implies you've got to be in the kitchen slaving away, making loads of meals to last you through the week. However, I tend to try and cook a bit extra at, when I am cooking, which can last me through a couple of days in terms of meals. So to give you an example, I made a sort of shakshuka? I never know how to say it, which is like the tinned tomatoes, and I added a tin of beans to that and an onion. And then each day, I kept that in the fridge in some Tupperware for 2 or 3 days. And then I heated it up each day. And one day I had it with poached eggs. One day I had it with halloumi. And, you know, you can add a piece of toast to that for some carbohydrate, or some potato wedges, a jacket potato. So that's sort of the bulk of the dish, but then you can add bits each day according to what you fancy. Doesn't even have to be that complicated. You know, having a supply of baked beans in the cupboard, or some tinned tuna, you can then, you know, I keep bread in the freezer, so then you can just pop toast in the toaster when you need it, and you don't need to worry about the bread going off. Sometimes it can be as simple as having a yogurt and putting that together with some tinned or frozen fruit and some granola, and that's instantly a balanced meal. I mean, you're talking to someone, although I'm a dietitian, I don't do a huge amount of cooking, which you might be surprised to hear. I eat a lot of tortellini, and that's so easy to cook, like 2 minutes in a pan of boiling water. Again, I'm not afraid of pre-prepared foods. I have a whole cupboard full of ready-made pasta sauces, so I might chuck a jar of that in with some tinned sweet corn or some frozen spinach or something, a bit of cheese on top, for calcium, for strong bones. So yeah, I really chuck things together quickly. Scrambled eggs, another great one. You can add in a handful of spinach to that, some grated cheese, chopped up ham, chopped up tomato. You know, it's all about working with simple staple foods and just adding in things that are going to give you a bit of added nutrition on top of that.
And I think one of the biggest things that I've learned for when I do want to cook, or I don't have access to a lot of throw together things, that pacing that throughout the day. So kind of, can I chop this one item now and go and rest, or go and do something else, and then come back and then chop something else? And then, you know, breaking up the task of preparing a dish into as many steps as possible throughout the day means that I'm not standing in the kitchen the entire time. And I found that has been really helpful. And there are a lot of things that you can do sitting down as well, like if you are having to do some prep. And then if I know, I don't know why I never did this before, but I wear my trainers if I have to be in the kitchen and do something, and just having that like extra, like making sure that I'm as comfortable as possible and as supported as possible, whether that be by sitting down to do some things or by standing up and wearing my most comfortable shoes. That's helped kind of limit the pain, which then makes me less fatigued while I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's good advice. I mean, I try to do minimal prep as possible. So in my freezer, like I said earlier, I have loads of pre-chopped vegetables. Even
and you can just freeze, like you can chop things and then freeze them without having to prepare them.
Yeah, you don't have to buy them ready prepared, because it is more expensive. You can do it yourself, put it in Tupperware, put it in plastic bag, put it in the freezer. Things like onion, you can buy bags of ready diced onion, ready pureed garlic, spices, herbs. I mean, there's a lot that you can keep in the freezer. Good during this time at the moment.
Yeah, except if you have a very small freezer, I suppose.
I know, that's my problem. I'm in a flat, and so freezer space is very limited.
Yeah.
And I could take you on a tour of my fridge and freezer if you really want to see the kind of stuff I have in there.
Yeah, if you could, that would be great. Would you mind?
Okay, let me just figure out how to do this. Okay, I'm taking you into my kitchen now.
Oh, I like your TV cabinet.
Oh, thank you. I moved into my flat quite recently. So obviously, before I open the fridge, probably just important to reiterate that this is by no means perfect. This is just what I have in at the moment. We're going through coronavirus. It's all a bit up in the air. So this is just my fridge. Yours doesn't need to look like it. And it's pretty, it's not colourful at the moment. It normally is. But I have a thing of Greek yogurt here. So like I was saying earlier, that's really good if you're putting together like a quick breakfast with some frozen berries, cereal, granola. I've got lots of tortellini here. So that's pasta that can just be prepared pretty quickly. Good old jam, you know, peanut butter and jam on toast. That's a quick, energy-rich snack. Eggs. I was very lucky to get my hands on some eggs because I know they've run out pretty much everywhere at the moment. I had scrambled eggs this morning, added in some spinach, which is down here, that was kind of going on. Cheese, good for calcium. Yeah, some fruit, grapes, lots of milk, and good old brioche, some snacks, which are perhaps not the healthiest, but fine in moderation. Hummus. So hummus with like pita breads, carrot sticks. I've got some celery to use up here, so I might have that as a snack. Got some courgette there. Again, more yogurts. Some potatoes. So, you know, I was thinking jacket potatoes with baked beans, tuna would be pretty quick and easy for a meal. And then sort of onions, tomatoes, spinach down there. I did also buy some smoothie today. Don't usually drink smoothie, but I'm finding it a little bit more difficult to get my hands on fruit and veg at the moment. And like I said earlier, small glass of fruit juice or smoothie per day is absolutely fine to meet one of your 5 a day. So coming into my freezer, I've got some pre-prepared potato Mediterranean veg, which is quite useful, putting together a tray bake with some protein like chicken, sausages, halloumi. I have got chicken here. Okay, so I know you can probably make healthier stuff yourself, but when I'm not feeling great and low on energy, that's pretty easy. The only reason everything's M&S is because I live above an M&S, by the way. It is expensive, but at the moment, I'm finding they have got deliveries coming in. So pre-prepared butternut squash chunks. So I think when I've got a bit more energy, I might make a risotto perhaps with that. It's great, 'cause it's reminding me what I actually have. Bean burgers. So again, I might put that together with, you know, the pre-prepared potatoes or the butternut squash to make that into a sort of a meal that I can just chuck on a tray and put in the oven. Got frozen pita bread. You can keep it in the freezer and go straight into the toaster, nice and easy to have with hummus or something. Fish cakes, which were reduced, hurrah. Frozen berries. Got some frozen chicken here. Might make that into a curry using a jar of sauce to save time and energy. And then sort of frozen veg, peas, Mediterranean vegetables, and a loaf of bread hiding under there. Shall I keep going?
Yeah, please.
So fruit, I was very lucky that today M&S had a delivery of fruit, so I have managed to stock up on some bits and bobs there. And then finally, we have my sort of pantry cupboard here. So I don't know if you can see, but I've got lots of jarred sauces. Here we go, Thai green curry, might use the frozen chicken for that. Pasta sauces. Now's probably not a time to be worrying too much about sugar and salt and food labels, but of course you can look at the food label and choose one that's mainly greens for, well actually this one's amber, but never mind. But you know, if it's green, it means it's low in sugar or fat, etc. So if you are really concerned about nutrition and food labels, you can use the labels. Passata, very useful for putting together quick soups, stews, pasta dishes. Dried pasta, good to have if you can get your hands on it at the moment. Snacks, got things like dark chocolate rice cakes. I find them quite filling and give you your sweet fix in the afternoon. You know, these are sort of crisp things, which again, at this moment in time, it's good to have in the cupboard because they last for a long time. Popcorn, that's probably a healthier, higher fibre snack to be having. Cereal, peanut butter, it's a good source of energy to have on toast. Risotto rice, baked beans, tinned fruit. Yeah, so that's pretty much an overview of the sorts of things that I'm having at this moment in time. So
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, very helpful. Thank you. I'd be curious whether you have any tips for making some foods last longer, in the sense of there are some foods that you can freeze, but say, you know, you've got something that's going a bit off and looks a little bit floppy, I suppose, for some of the produce. What are some good ways of using things up before they go bad, or kind of keeping your food as healthy as possible? So not healthy, like as fresh as possible. Like I know that you know, keeping herbs in, I don't know if this is true, but keeping herbs wrapped in like a kitchen roll or something might keep them fresher.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in this area by any means. I think I've done this with lettuce before. If you've got a bag of lettuce or salad leaves, you can put a piece of kitchen towel in there. And I think it keeps it crisp for longer because a kitchen towel can absorb some of the moisture. Herbs, you can definitely freeze them. So once you've used what you need, chop them up, put them in some Tupperware, freeze them. Same goes for things like ginger, chilies. In terms of things like vegetables, so things like celery, carrots, onions, don't chuck them out when they're not looking great. You can boil them up in some water to make a nice vegetable stock, which you can then freeze and use to make soups, or you can use them directly in soups. So just kind of saute them down and put them in casseroles, put them in pasta sauces.
And Sebastian just came up next to me and wrote down, herbs arrow make pesto.
Pesto?
You can whiz them up with some nuts and some oil and some cheese if you've got, and some lemon juice. It won't oxidize, but that's a high energy thing. He's gone back to working out, so we'll leave him. We'll leave him there.
Very yeah. Also, I think Jack Monroe. Are you familiar with the chef Jack Monroe?
Yes.
Yeah. So she, what's her strap line?
Bootstrap cook. Is it the bootstrap cook?
Bootstrap cook, I think. So she's a celebrity chef that became famous because she fed her young son on a really, really tight budget. I think she was relying on sort of universal credit at the time, so they had a limited amount of money for food each week, and she has managed to create an incredible set of resources and recipes on her website. And she's a big advocate for tin food, frozen food, like we've been talking about today. And she was talking about using up leftover lettuce in pesto. So it doesn't have to be basil like we normally think. You know, anything green or kale, anything goes.
Yeah, and I will get some links to Jack's work and share them as well, because there's lots of cookbooks with money-saving tips and ways to kind of make the most of what you've got in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So I don't know kind of from whether you will have any more information than kind of everyone else has on this at the moment, but I know a lot of people are really struggling to get food, just generally being able to have access to that. One of the things that I've seen a lot in the disability community, people who either have very limited diets because of their gut, for example, or say someone with a neurodivergence has very fixed foods that they can eat. What can people do if, you know, their safe foods aren't really available to them at the moment? I don't know if you can really get help for that at the moment, but do you have any advice?
That's very difficult. Obviously, I can't give individual advice, so it's difficult to sort of know what those specific needs would be without speaking to the person. But I do feel for people like celiacs, for example, who need gluten-free food and perhaps it's not available in supermarkets. Obviously, let's use celiac gluten-free as an example. You can buy your gluten-free products usually in supermarkets, like gluten-free bread and pasta. But when they're not available, you might have to be a little bit more resourceful and think outside the box about how you can still get some carbohydrate foods which might not have gluten in them. And so you might have to rely on potatoes more, for example, rather than gluten-free pasta or gluten-free bread. So I'm sure lots of the charities like Celiac UK probably have some information on this. Or you could speak, obviously, if you can, speak to a healthcare professional like a dietitian. I'm sure if you look on Instagram, there'll be dietitians that you could perhaps chat to. I think some health professionals are offering free or discounted consultations at the moment as well, in light of the corona situation. It's a very difficult one. I don't have a good answer to that, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
I'll work with what you have, and obviously we don't want people to start eating things that are going to make their symptoms worse, but at the same time we need to balance that with you eating and staying well and getting enough nutrition.
Yeah, and that's difficult for people who might not have been able to get an online delivery slot if they don't have someone that can go and get food for them. So yeah, I don't know whether there'll be any advice for people who just can't access food at the moment.
I guess one thing that they could do, if you fall into the category of being a vulnerable person due to your health background, then you might qualify for the limited hours that supermarkets are offering at the moment for shopping. So it might be that if you're able to, or you can get someone to go on your behalf to, I think it's where I live at the moment, 8 till 9 on a Tuesday and Thursday, they're reserving that, I think, for elderly people, NHS workers and vulnerable people. So have a look at what's available in your local area. It might be that you take up the supermarket on that offer of restricted shopping hours and see if you can get your hands on what you need then.
And there are also a lot of groups going around where local communities are coming together. So people who are able to go out and pick up food for other people have been offering to do that. I know a few people who have. And just a caveat, most of them will talk about there doesn't need to be an exchange of money. So kind of just be careful and stay safe just in case if you are kind of having strangers helping you out with that.
Yeah, I have thought about that myself, actually. I think obviously you probably need to pay them for the food that they're buying you, but just be careful about maybe not handing the money over until, I don't know how you would work this out.
No.
But maybe you can, if you need to avoid cash, you online bank transfer it. I don't know. I would encourage people to lean on family and friends or someone that you know, but obviously that won't be an option for everybody. Food banks, I know they are working very, very hard to meet demand at the moment. So see what's available in your local area. Where I live, the local high street, a lot of the cafes and restaurants are doing free food delivery to vulnerable and older people, which is really nice.
Oh, that is nice. Yeah. So what have been the biggest kind of diet cures or protects you against corona stuff that you've seen happening? Is there anything that's particularly pissed you off?
Well, I've seen a lot of articles at the moment on like boost your immune system, and I think that whole immune boosting phrase is really not helpful, because actually if you have a boosted immune system you can be really sick from it. It's not a good thing. So by all means talk about nutrition in terms of optimizing your health and immunity, but let's not talk about it in terms of boosting your immunity, because that doesn't exist.
So when we are then talking about optimizing health and immunity, what are some things for people to think about?
Unfortunately, it's boring and it's not glamorous advice, other than eating a varied and balanced diet, getting as many different colours into your diet as possible, especially from fruits and vegetables, which are full of vitamins, minerals and antioxidants, which are important for immunity. You don't need any nutrition supplements. Obviously, some people with conditions will be taking various medications or supplements, and we're not going to be going into that today on an individual basis. And as I said earlier, what works for one person might not work for another. But in terms of immunity, there's no evidence that supplements are going to sort of help to improve or boost your immunity in any way. The only supplement that the government in the UK recommend that we should be taking is vitamin D. And the recommended amount is 10 micrograms of vitamin D a day during winter months. So that's roughly from around October to April. And you can just get a standard vitamin D supplement from the supermarket or from your pharmacy, for example. Might be more difficult to get your hands on them at the moment. Like I said earlier, we're talking about the context of a balanced diet over a duration of time. So if you can't get your hands on vitamin D for a few weeks, it's not the end of the world, as long as you are eating a varied and balanced diet. If you can get outside for some sunlight exposure most days, and that's a good way of helping your body to make vitamin D. And also some food sources have smaller amounts of vitamin D in them, like eggs and oily fish, for example. But generally in the UK, we can't get enough vitamin D from food alone. So that's why the government do recommend that we consider taking a daily supplement during the winter months.
Yeah, and hopefully now the sun's going to start coming out a little bit more. And we can...
Yeah, it's sunny here, which is nice. I went on a walk today. Hopefully, we're going to be allowed to continue going out for walks, but time will tell, I suppose.
I just had a question pop up. I don't think this is necessarily within the scope of what we're talking about, but I was a bit curious, does onset of chronic illness relate to nutritional intake in any way?
I mean, again, there's so many chronic illnesses, difficult to sort of unpick them all, but generally, nutrition isn't known to be a major cause of any chronic illness. It might be linked to the etiology of certain conditions, but really more research is needed, especially for using Ehlers-Danlos syndrome as an example. I know there have been studies going on and people talking about potential links with nutrition, but at the moment there's no evidence to suggest that poor diet is a cause of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Yeah, and that's going to be very interesting kind of in the next few years with more research happening with all of that. I think I've been keeping an eye on it as well. You covered a lot of really helpful tips, so thank you. I'm wondering whether there's anything from your perspective that you haven't talked about that you think might be helpful. I'm
trying to think about what questions that I get asked the most. How can you prepare quick and easy meals? So just a couple of Instagram accounts that I find really useful. There's a woman called Amy Shepherd Food. We can link to it in the notes perhaps. She's a family mum based down in Cornwall, but she posts really easy, simple, tasty meal ideas on her Instagram page. So I think that's something I've been using her recipes a lot recently, and they're pretty cheap using store cupboard essentials. Jack Monroe, we've already talked about her as well. Budget Bites, she's another really good chef who, as the name suggests, puts together quite cheap, easy to prepare meals. Supplements, as I said earlier, beyond a balanced diet, most people can get what they need from eating food alone. It's far better to get your nutrition from eating whole foods as opposed to popping pills, because whole foods have the added benefits of nutrients like fiber, for example, and antioxidants, which you cannot replicate in a pill. Gut health is a big topic of interest at the moment. Lots of people asking me, should I take probiotics? It's an exciting area, but again, we still need a huge amount of research, and it's very difficult to recommend specific strains of probiotics for individual conditions. So speak to a health professional if you are thinking about trying a probiotic. But actually, you can, by having a balanced diet, which is high in fiber, that's sort of equally beneficial for your gut health as well.
Cool. I think that's also just very important, since people are spending more money now to try and make sure that they can get what they need. So kind of knowing where to spend and where to save your money where possible, I think is particularly helpful.
Yeah, and also on the topic of where to get advice from, I'd just like to highlight that the British Dietetic Association, which is the professional body for dietitians in the UK, on their website they have I think over 50 free food fact sheets, which are sort of 2-page A4 sheets on a whole range of different medical conditions, and it's all about the link between the condition and nutrition, and it offers really practical, useful advice on you know, sort of recipe ideas, foods that you should be eating, and why that's good for you. So they have one on chronic fatigue syndrome, for example. They don't have one on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but as I said earlier, beyond eating a varied and balanced diet, that's the best thing that you can really be doing. But do have a look on the BDA website.
Yeah, and I know that for some conditions it's about like how you spread your meals out as well, right? Like just to kind of keep things a bit more stable, whether like some conditions it's small meals very often rather than like very big meals 3 times a day. So yeah,
and obviously we haven't touched on sort of other symptoms that people with chronic illnesses might have, like nausea, lack of appetite, mental health problems as well. So there's lots of things that can affect your food intake. So as you said earlier, don't put pressure on yourself to be perfect in terms of having 3 regimented meals a day. It might be that you have one day when you're just snacking on lots of smaller meals. It might be that some days you can only manage 2 meals, but you know, the next day you sort of make up for that. So it's about finding a balance across a sustained period of time rather than just focusing on being perfect on one particular day.
And stay hydrated, I think.
Yeah, stay hydrated, try and sleep well, try and manage your stress. These are all things that you've probably been hearing lots about recently. And of course, in terms of corona, the best thing you can do is self-isolate and wash your hands and maintain hygiene.
Yeah, and just look, one last water thing, I suppose. I know a lot of people hate drinking water. So there are ways to make your water taste better, and it doesn't just have to be water, right?
Yeah. So you can add, you know, frozen berries, ice cubes to water, you know, squash. I use fruit squash. And, you know, sparkling water, if that makes it more palatable for you. Soups and yogurts and porridge and jelly, these are all hydrating foods as well. So when we think about our fluid intake, it doesn't all have to come from just drinking. Tea and coffee up to 3 or 4 mugs a day can help with your fluid requirements. Herbal teas are great as well. Just make sure they don't interact with any supplements or medications that you're taking. Yeah, so hydration, I see a lot of people who have migraines and headaches and things, and actually when you look at their hydration, they're not drinking anywhere near the amount of fluids that their body needs.
Is the 8 glasses a day thing still recommended, or is that like a random number that was thrown out when we were kids?
I think that's a rule of thumb, but actually people's fluid requirements are very individual. But in terms of dietetic advice, I think if you're aged between, don't quote me on this, but I think it's between 18 and 60, your fluid requirements are 35 milliliters per kilo of body weight. So, you know, if you're 60 kilos, 60 times by 35 mils will give you what your fluid requirements are for the day. So you can calculate that yourself at home. Generally, as a rule of thumb, around 2 liters is what most adults need to be aiming for. But if you're exercising, sweating a lot in a hot climate, and also if you're sick, so if you're unfortunate enough to contract coronavirus or flu or any other, sorry, battery's running low. Your fluid requirements might be higher. So it's a very individual thing, fluid requirements.
Great. So I think since your battery's running low, I think we'll probably leave it here. But that was really informative and really helpful, and I'm very grateful for you sharing your time with us today. And yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hope everybody stays well and just, you know, keep calm, carry on, keep well.
Stay safe, and thank you, everyone. I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye.